Kingslayer's up. Hello, guys. Are WP multi-sites better using subdomains or folders in main domain? It depends. Well, first of all, I've never used WP multi-sites. If that's what I'm thinking, which is like, isn't that like a way to control multiple sites from one dashboard? Can somebody shed some light on that?
Yeah, and it's also a way to control the different language websites.
Okay. I've never used it, so I don't know about, I can't speak on WP multi-sites. I just know that throughout my career, I've heard a lot of stuff that negative about them. So I've just never even attempted, because I was like, why would I want to start building WP multi-sites when I've heard about issues that arise because of it? So as far as building multiple sites, I just do separate WordPress installations on subdomains of a root domain. We talk about this a lot. And I don't know if we have an actual knowledge base article for this, or I would give it to you, King. But what I'm just going to call you King. Anyways, but yeah, I mean, typically what I do for like lead gen stuff or sites with, at businesses that have multiple locations is I try to build out, like on the root domain will be their main brand, right? So that's basically like their branded domain, where you might have a locations page or something that will point out all of the different locations that they have, that they have locations in, excuse me. And then each one of those you'd click through and it would go to a subdomain. And typically I just name the subdomain as after the city. So it would be city, dot joesplumbing.com. So city1 dot, and then city2 dot, and city3 dot, and so on and so forth. And that's typically how I do it. And I like to do that because we talk about this a lot, but it's because it mitigates risk. Each one of those subdomains is considered an individual entity by Google, even though it's part of an overall brand. The site itself, the digital asset, is a separate entity. So if any one of your subdomains ends up catching a penalty, it should be isolated to that one particular subdomain. Whereas if you caught a penalty on a root domain, it would affect all of the subordinate, or the subdomains, excuse me, all of the subdomains. So like essentially if you caught a penalty on a root, then all of the subdomains are in trouble, right? They're all going to be caught up in that penalty. But if you catch a penalty on a subdomain only, then it won't affect the root and it won't affect the other subdomains. And so my point is that's why I like to do it that way. It's a little bit more of a management headache, especially when you get multiple locations, like many locations. It can be a pain in the ass. But here's a trick: just use something like main WP. And you can use main WP to manage, have a separate installation, maybe a separate subdomain installation that you use as a control panel specifically for main WP, so that you can update, add and remove plugins, make mass bulk edits and changes to all of the sites at one time using main WP. So that's really what I've been doing, is for every one of my multi-location businesses that I either provide SEO services for, or if they're my own lead gen assets, then I just use main WP, a separate installation on each one of the branded domains, either on a subdomain, or sometimes I'll even put it just on the root domain itself, because the root domain is typically just used as like a branding page, because all of the heavy lifting is done by each one of the subdomains as far as content marketing, or it really just depends on how the configuration is. But I personally, I would recommend that you would go with subdomains. I'm not going to recommend WP multi-sites. I really can't speak about it, but I've never heard anything really good about it. So I would recommend that you would just do separate WordPress installations on subdomains for the reasons I just mentioned. You don't want to put them in folders, although if you have separate WordPress installations in subfolders, it's still treated as being in part of the root domain by Google. So there is a slight SEO benefit to doing it that way, as far as putting them in subfolders. From what I hear, I don't know, because I personally have always gone the subdomain route for reducing risk. But I've heard through various other SEOs and colleagues and such that there's a little bit of a benefit, an SEO benefit, to having them all in subfolders, but you open yourself up to more potential risk at that point. Okay. As far as link building strategy for main domain at first, or to each subdomain, really, to be honest with you, I usually will start. It depends on how I got it set up, but I like to do one branded syndication network for the root domain, which can serve as the syndication network for all of the subdomain sites too. So here, let me give you an example. Let's say that you got a site with 4 locations, right? So you put the branding page basically on the root domain. It can be a WordPress installation. You can use the blog from the root domain as the content distribution engine, right? So the syndication point that distributes the content for your content marketing efforts. And what I would do is then I would create in the blog categories and basically silo out the blog to have a category to match each one of the subdomains. So that when you are, that way you can do your content marketing and distribution from the root domain. So you only have one site that you need to, I don't know how that popped up. You only got, it keeps popping up, look at that. It wants everybody to see it. Anyways, I would do all my content marketing from the one. And here's the thing, you can do that and place the content within the categories that match the subdomains so that you can have, you know, location specific posts that are going to benefit those posts. You just put an internal link within the content body of that post that links up to or down to the subdomain site, if that makes sense. That way you only got one blog to manage. Now, the idea here is you start content marketing, set up a consistent and regular publishing schedule, start content marketing, start tracking results. Some of the subdomain sites are going to respond better than others. That's just the nature of the game. So the ones that respond well, you just keep blogging for. The ones that aren't responding as well as you would like them to, you can always at that point go set up a location specific syndication network for that subdomain and then start blogging directly from that subdomain to that location specific network. That'll give it an extra push. But I always hold off on doing that until after I've determined whether or not that's even necessary. And the way that you do that is just by, again, set up the root domain, use that as your blog, set up all your subdomain sites, and then start content marketing from your root domain blog to cover link building for all of your subdomain sites. That way, you know, try to achieve results with the least amount of effort is my point, right? And the least amount of resources. And having to build another syndication network or purchase another syndication network and then also having another blog to maintain and all of that, that's just additional work that most of the time or a good part of the time is unnecessary. And so, you know, we see a lot of people that are ambitious and they want to go out and build 15 networks right off the bat. And I say, why? You know, why go through all that? Why not start with one and see how well it performs? And then if you can add additional networks as needed, and then you stop as soon as you started to achieve the results that you want, and you save yourself a ton of work and effort. So that said, as far as you would be building from the main domain, the backlinks from the content marketing would benefit both the root domain as well as the subdomain sites, because the content would be published from the root domain, which means there would be an automatic backlink through the attribution link to the root domain, which will subsequently also benefit all of the subdomains. Okay. But at the same time, you're going to have a contextual link within the content body of the post that's going to also be pointing to the subdomain site. So you are basically killing two birds with one stone through the content marketing and the syndication network. If you're going to be building external third-party links, then I would recommend that typically what I do is just start building citations and in now press releases to, and then obviously drive stacks too, but to each one of the separate subdomain sites, so that the vast majority of the link building is actually being done to the subdomain sites and not to the root domain. Because remember, if you start doing third-party backlinks to the root domain and you catch a penalty, all of your subdomains are going to be in the tank, right? So you want to kind of mitigate that risk. Great question, though, by the way. Any comments, guys, or can I move on? Okay, I'm going to move on.